Bruce. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, great. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about emergency preparedness today. I will leave emergency fairly broad. Of course, we live in the Pacific Northwest, and there are all kinds of things that we might need to prepare for or consider in terms of emergencies. Of course, the wildfires have been very ever present on all of our minds as we continue to battle those every year, particularly in Southern Oregon and some warmer parts of the state. Of course, we are headed into cooler months, so more time to prepare and plan for fire safety for next year. But as we're also heading into the colder months, we're also heading into times where we may anticipate more power outages. So kind of when you think about emergency preparedness, think about all of the different things that we might want to plan for. All right. So kind of general good first step in talking about emergency preparedness is being prepared. Step one is to kind of wrap your head around all the different ways that you might want to prepare. And I do want to say that I think preparing and kind of just having a general conversation about emergency planning, most people, this is not their favorite subject because it's thinking about kind of the worst case scenario and what might happen and how you need to be prepared for that. Plus, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But I do want to just emphasize that as you kind of think about some of what we're talking about today, this is not something you have to do all at once. In fact, a lot of people in the field of emergency planning say that doing a little bit at a time can be the best way to do it. You're more likely to get some things accomplished and to actually feel more just doing a little bit at a time.
Here's a quick question.
Yeah, great. Please.
Are these slides going to be available?
They are. And actually, I have
so we don't have to be writing madly while you're talking?
You absolutely do not need to be writing madly. I'm going to share with you quite a few documents. I'm going to share this presentation. I also have a handout that's also going to be available to have some kind of pointers to think about. All right. So again, the most important thing to consider is to start doing this planning work. And you're already doing it. You're here to listen and learn and share your experiences with others. And that is significant. So a couple of just bullet points here, and by no means is this an exhaustive list. These are just some initial things for you to kind of be thinking about and planning. So the first thing I would say to really think about and consider is writing down and considering your personal support network. And when I say this could look like a lot of different people. It's very specific to you and your family structure, your friend structure, but really considering who is in your personal network, who might be if you have a caregiver, your primary caregiver. And I think also another important consideration when compiling this list of individuals is who has kind of the woodwork to be a person that is available to help you in an emergency situation where A, you might be needing to evacuate your home, B, somebody that you might need to stay with. It might not be somebody in your household, but considering different kinds of emergencies that might occur, that could look like your sister across town. It might look like your everyday personal caregiver. It might also look like who would be the plan B person to step in should something happen to your personal everyday caregiver. So I think this is not just a good exercise for emergency planning, but also just a good exercise in general for who your support team and support network is. And your care coordinator with the association is more than happy to sit down and help you with this. I think it's an important exercise to do, not just alone, but with your support network. And the most important thing is to document who those people are. Who are those people that are in your support network, and what are their different roles, and what would they do to support you in an emergency? And we'll kind of go through some of this a little bit more in detail as we go along, but feel free to pause me if you have anything that's coming up. The next thing to consider, which kind of goes along with your support network, is thinking about emergency information that you need. And I know a lot of this sounds very basic, but when we are in an emergency situation or a disaster strikes, most human beings are not really great or at stopping and thinking rationally and grabbing the insurance card and the medication list and all of those different things. So it's a good idea to have all of that information in one document, whether that is a physical paper document that you might keep in your go bag or a copy in the car. Or, you know, we have the advantage of technology on our side now. I would say, you know, maybe compiling a list of all your important emergency information, all of your medical information, and saving it to the cloud or saving it in a Google Doc and sending it to all of your personal network folks so that they have copies of it. So there's lots of different creative ways of putting this together. And I'm going to be sharing a link with you in an upcoming slide for a medical information packet that is made available through the ALS Association that allows you to put all of that information down and is a great document to just have on hand and make copies of. Again, just kind of a basic good rule of thumb, but would be remiss if I didn't mention it. Testing your smoke alarms regularly, testing carbon monoxide detectors if you have them in your home. Doing these things just on a regular basis is good practice and helping to prevent or avoid issues that might come up. Knowing where your utility valve cutoffs are in your home. I just bought, whoops, sorry about that. I just bought a new house, and as I was putting this together, I thought, do I know where all of that is? So it's a good idea to just kind of give yourself a reassessment of your home, your space, and just making sure you're regularly checking those things. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a further slide. But consider, if you haven't already, whether you might want to invest in a generator. Of course, there are lots and lots of different types of generators out there, and you'll want to consider what you are wanting to run. I bring this up specifically for folks with ALS because typically there are medical devices that you might need to be running, and there might be multiple medical devices that you want to run at the same time. I also think about how often people have, you know, when you think about power, really thinking about all of the different things that you are utilizing at a given time, and how you would handle a situation if you didn't have access to those things readily. This is just a point to consider, and we'll talk a little bit more about generators in a bit. So next thing to prepare for is to identify an evacuation route. This is, you know, something I would encourage you to think about where you spend the most time in your life. If that's at home, then think about how you would evacuate your home. Again, sounds basic, but when mobility becomes impacted, it might change that situation for you. It may make it more difficult and more time consuming for you to consider evacuating from the front door if you're spending more of your time in the back room near the back door. Maybe there's steps out the back door because it's not the space that you normally use. So you may want to think about, do I need a ramp or do I need to make that a more accessible space? So just start kind of thinking about how you might leave your home. And then maybe you're spending time at work and talking to your workplace about accommodations that might need to be made, or a family or friend's home. And then of course, with that comes transportation. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but just encouraging you to start thinking about how you might leave. A lot of folks with ALS who utilize power mobility or scooters sometimes will think about purchasing an accessible van or an accessible vehicle. But not everybody has access to an accessible vehicle. So thinking about how you might be able to leave your home safely in the chance of an emergency if you don't have access to something like an accessible van. And it may be worth looking into what your local transportation options are in the case of a personal emergency where it's not impacting your whole neighborhood or your whole community, who you might be able to quickly call for a ride if you needed that. I've also included here to contact your utility company. Also consider contacting non-emergency or the fire department. And the reason I include that is because a lot of fire departments, utility companies will actually take down your name and your information if you indicate to them that you're a person living with some sort of a disability. You can choose to tell them that you have ALS or not, but it may be helpful to let them know that you are possibly using BiPAP at night or that you use a power wheelchair. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be able to prioritize you in case of an emergency, but it might just help provide some additional support and let emergency medical personnel know that you're a person living with some of these factors and may want to, sorry, just got distracted there for a second, may want to just ensure that they have your name and your contact information to be available. And then lastly, another consideration, and this actually came up quite a bit with the really bad wildfires last year, is to create just sort of an inventory of the possessions in your home. There was an individual who experienced some challenges with the fires last year, and for insurance purposes needed to kind of run through what they had lost. And we just as humans are not very good at remembering all of our possessions and the things that we have in our home. So I just add that as an added just consideration. Okay. So just a couple other little tidbits to consider when you're sitting down to think about your personal support network, which we had talked about. I think it's also important to consider that one, if you're listing somebody, your sister across town is somebody who's, kind of in your personal support network. Sister says, yeah, definitely want you to be, coming here in the case of an emergency. I have the closest home for you to be able to access. Making sure that your sister knows like what you would need to be bringing or what you might need to have on hand in the case of an emergency where you need to go stay at her house. Preparing notes and checklists ahead of time. Again, we are not great as humans at necessarily being level-headed in a crisis. So if you anticipate that maybe your primary caregiver, there's a chance that they wouldn't be able to be with you, or somebody that isn't as familiar as supporting you is helping you in the case of an emergency, having some instructions with some of your medical equipment might be helpful. Having checklists ahead of time to indicate when you need help with your medications, or, again, this is all very personal to you and what you need, but never a bad idea to be over prepared for those kinds of circumstances. And then I think identifying a meeting place ahead of time. So this comes up in the case of like a large family who might not have access to your phone if the power went out and you needed to go to sister's house, or your whole family's in the house and it's a fire and you want to make sure everybody gets to that tree right down the road if that happens. So good idea just to identify a meeting place and talk about that with your team. Okay. So I referenced the medical information materials that are available through the ALS Association. And I'm going to share all of these links, but I want to make you aware of 4 different resources that we have. And we are happy to mail any of these resources out to you so you have copies. You can order them through the national website. They're free to order, but it might come quicker if you just try to access that through the chapter, and you can just send me an email or put a note in the chat and let me know that you'd like a copy sent to you. So the first resource here is the ALS Association's medical information packet. So this packet is actually pretty extensive, and it was created as a tool to be able to sort of share your medical information, as well as to educate medical providers about some pertinent ALS related information. I think it works kind of dual fold for sharing your insurance information, listing your medications, who's your personal support team, kind of a good comprehensive document for all of that. But there's also some tidbits and some suggestions kind of generally about ALS care listed in this packet that could be presented, say, to an ER doc if you are being quickly rushed off to the hospital. For instance, in that packet, there is some references to typically people with ALS not necessarily needing oxygen if they're experiencing trouble breathing. Now, of course, that's a big caveat, and doctors, generally speaking, know what they're doing. But if you live in a very rural area and you're going to a hospital that isn't familiar with you or with your care, they may take a quick step to put you on oxygen if you're feeling short of breath, and may not necessarily be the best thing for you. So it's another tool to have in your toolkit. It can also be really helpful for family caregivers or individuals in your life who might be advocating for you in a hospital setting, so that they can also present just some general good guidelines about ALS to doctors or to medical professionals that may not be as familiar. The second document here, and I'm gonna click on this one so I can just show you all what this entails. Sorry, it'll take a second to load here. So this is the key medical information card, and this is also just meant to be another tool to use in an emergency situation. Not sure if all of you guys can see that okay, but it's just a quick little card. You can write your name there. It indicates that you have ALS.
Oh, it's like that far from his nose, so don't go left.
Oh, okay. Here we go. It also gives you an option to indicate whether you have an advance directive in place, which I think is helpful. This can be a particularly good resource for you if you have bulbar onset ALS.
Hey, Cassy,
Yeah.
we don't see the card. We still just see your.
Oh, well.
I'm not sure who else was talking, but.
Oh, I thought she said to move it left or something. Sorry. Let me see if I
Still to see the PowerPoint.
got it. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks all for hanging with me here. Okay.
There we go.
How about now? You can see it now?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so here's what it looks like. So it is a little card. It kind of expands out like an accordion, and it gives you the opportunity to just show this to somebody in the case that you need to. This, I think, can be a really good resource, as I mentioned, for people with bulbar symptoms, bulbar being difficulty with speech or swallowing and speaking. This can be a really great tool for people who are still driving and have bulbar onset. If you were ever to get pulled over, we have heard of folks getting pulled over before, having officers think that they are drunk because their speech is slurred. And so this can be whip right out of your pocket and say, no, actually, here's what's going on. This right here is just a quick little alpha core board, something that, again, if you can quickly point to letters to spell something out, gives you room for emergency contacts, and it also gives just some little pointers about ALS. Again, if I'm short of breath, do not give me oxygen unless I have another respiratory condition. Lying on my back. So again, just some considerations about ALS that can be included in this card. I think the next resource, let me see if I can find that, is the File of Life card, which I will also show you. You all see this?
Yes.
Great. All right, so this is a File of Life card. Again, just another resource. This actually is yay big. There's a magnet on the back. The piece of paper comes out and expands. You can write your medical information, emergency contacts. I think there's room on there for your med list. And then you can stick it in your File of Life card, you know, put it on the refrigerator. Encourage people with ALS and also your spouse or your caregiver to have one of these as well. If something were to happen to your caregiver, it's a good idea for both of you to have this available. And this can be a resource for EMTs that are coming into your home in the case of an emergency, just something to quickly grab. And then the last resource I'm going to share here is the hospital communication sign. This is more specific to use in a hospital, but we're going to talk a little bit about go bags in a minute. And this is not a bad idea to just have something like this in your go bag. Again, just some quick little things that might be helpful. We all know, especially with COVID, hospitals are limiting the number of visitors that can come in a lot of cases. And historically, a lot of hospital systems and medical doctors are not terribly familiar with ALS outside of your ALS clinics. And so having something like this to just be a quick reminder to nurses and folks in the room, especially if you don't have your support person readily available to advocate for you, can be important. Okay. Oops. I'm going to go back here. Okay, can you see the slides again?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, so I know that a few of you on the call live in the Portland, Multnomah County area, and some of you don't. So I just want to give kind of a caveat that this specific slide is for folks in Portland and Multnomah County, but I'm also including some information in upcoming slides about some other resources that are out there. Some counties have a public alert and what they call an additional needs registry. Jackson County, I believe, has one as well. Some other counties, smaller counties, not necessarily. That's when you're going to just want to call non-emergency or your fire department to let them know that you're a person living with some sort of a disability. But I just want to let folks who are in Portland and Multnomah County know you can actually go on to the website below. Again, I'm going to share these slides with you. And you can get on the additional needs registry. And essentially allows you to, it basically shares your needs and your contact with fire responders and 911. They may send you info about emergency planning. And basically it helps to contribute to the city and county disaster planning plans, which I think is actually really smart because when they're budgeting funds and for a certain number of people, it's good for them to have an actual, count of who is actually living with some sort of a disability or might need further assistance. So just something to consider. And I'm going to just pause. Does anybody have any questions or have any comments or anything they want to add? I don't think I see anything in the chat box at this point. Okay, great. All right. So another resource that I want all of you to be aware of is the CERT program, Community Emergency Response Team. Not sure if any of you are familiar with this program, but it's essentially a program
That was
that,
what?
say again? Oh,
Not
okay.
muted, right?
You're not muted. Did you say something, Scott?
No,
No, I was asking him, this is his wife. I was asking him a question. I thought we were muted. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. So community emergency response teams are essentially volunteers who opt for information and training in disaster preparedness. So they usually get trained in fire safety, search and rescue, team organization, and kind of are there to be able to help individuals in their community in disaster situations, to give like professional responders more opportunity to work on complex sort of situations that they're dealing with. So generally speaking, folks will volunteer to get more of this training, which you absolutely could. But I also think it's a good idea to know where your local community emergency response team is and consider reaching out to them and also letting them know, hey, you know, you are the person responsible for the CERT team in my neighborhood. Just want to let you know what I'm going, you know, what's going on with me. So that if you are coming around in the case of a fire or an earthquake or something like that, you can know that I live here and could use some support in the case of an emergency. All right.
We can't hear her.
So we've talked a lot about preparing. Now, something kind of practical, I think, that you can do, if there's one thing to kind of take away from my chatting at you all this whole time, is to consider creating a go bag. So what is a go bag? A go bag can be a bag, it could be a backpack, it could be a box, it could be whatever you want it to really be, but essentially something you can quickly grab and take with you in the case of an emergency. I think this is probably the most important thing that you could do, because again, humans, we are not equipped to quickly and efficiently think about all that we might need in an emergency. We might not have the time to do that, to go around your house and try to figure out how to gather all of these materials and take them with you. Fully recognizing that some of the things that you might put in your go bag are things that you use on a regular basis. But again, trying to just have a designated place where you can have the majority of this kept to minimize the number of things that you have to add at the last minute. So some things to possibly consider putting in a go bag. Having a communication board or some sort of lower tech supplies, again, if you are experiencing changes in your speech. I feel pretty passionate about this. If you rely on a computer or technology for your communication, even if that's a phone and you use something like a text-to-speech app, for instance, if your phone ends up dying and you rely on that for communication, you may want to just make sure you have something simple like a whiteboard or a little boogie board or a pen and paper in your bag. If writing is impacted as well, having something like an Alpha Core board, like I showed you earlier in that file of life card, can also be really helpful. Just something very basic, doesn't need power, doesn't need anything fancy for you to be able to quickly communicate with those around you. General rule of thumb.
Cassy,
Yeah.
Greg has a comment.
I can't see you, so sorry, go ahead.
Regarding medications, my pharmacist reminded me that medications have expiration dates. So if you keep an emergency supply, you need to change them every now and then just to make sure they're still good.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Greg. And I apologize if anybody wants to say anything. Yeah, just take yourself off mute and interrupt me because I've got not enough screens and too many things up on my computer. All right, let me get back to the slide. So yeah, great point about medications, Greg. Also, again, we already talked about it, but keeping a list of your medications. And if you have a very complicated medication schedule, possibly including that schedule in your go bag. A first aid kit can be a helpful consideration. Water, if you can, grab it. If you are planning on evacuating somewhere, you know, generally speaking, you would hope that they would have water and snacks and some, you know, if you went to like the convention center or something like that, they're generally going to have those kinds of supplies, but they're probably not necessarily going to have Ensure or, you know, formula if you are a person who uses a feeding tube. So trying to have some of that on hand or some extra is a good idea. If you ever get into a pinch in an emergency situation and you don't have those kinds of supplies with you, definitely reach out to your doctor's office, reach out to us, and we'll see how we can help. Formula also expires, so a good idea to, you know, if you do keep kind of a small supply on hand, to check the expiration date and revolve those as you need to. Good idea to have copies of your insurance cards or insurance information. Glasses and hearing aids, never a bad idea, especially if you use readers, to have an extra pair of glasses or additional hearing aids if, you know, if you can spare those in a go bag. We've talked a lot about important documents, whatever format makes sense for you. Good idea to have multiple copies. Never a bad idea to make sure that other people in your support network have copies of really important documents, so that if you did experience a house fire or something like that and you didn't have a backup, that they could have those for you. Backup batteries and alternative power sources. This is pretty important, especially if you use different pieces of medical devices, knowing also how long your battery charges last, phone chargers, cash, some other just kind of basic considerations that you want to think about. So I want to take a moment to just talk a little bit about mobility considerations. So it's important to think about, of course, considering how you would evacuate your home in an emergency, but it's also, I think, important to consider whether or not you utilize a wheelchair or a walker, or what kind of mobility devices you might use now or may eventually use in the future, how you might plan for various situations. You know, if you live on a first floor, you don't have an upstairs, and you have no steps to leave your house, this is probably not going to be a huge consideration for you. However, if you sleep on the second floor of your home and have stairs to exit your home and stairs to go downstairs, you may want to consider whether or not you want to invest in something that you might need to have on hand to quickly get downstairs. We have certainly known folks who live on a second story apartment. And so considering how you would evacuate and how you would safely leave your apartment if you live upstairs to get down those stairs. So I'm going to show a few options. I also, sorry, I skipped over it. But it's not a bad idea if you have a little, like, let's say that you use a larger power wheelchair in your home. Not a bad idea to have a transport or a lightweight foldable wheelchair on hand, whether that's in the vehicle or something you keep by the back door, just in the case that you do need to leave in a vehicle that isn't able to accommodate a larger power chair. Just never a bad idea to have those lighter weight wheelchairs on hand. So I'm going to show some different options for ways of leaving in an emergency for a person who maybe typically uses a wheelchair but has to access stairs. And I want to say that this is not an ideal way of getting downstairs. There could be a lot of injuries that occur with this. I would only ever recommend doing this in the case of an emergency. This is not something you would want to regularly utilize if you had stairs in your home. So evacuation blankets. These are typically, it's kind of tarp with straps, as you can see. It usually would require 2 people at least to help the person evacuate, and kind of the person would lay here and then they carry the person down the stairs. These are available pretty inexpensive on Amazon and are typically kind of used by like emergency personnel in those kinds of cases, but something you could also have at home. Some other different options. This evacuation chair is basically a little seat with straps that can be lifted out of an existing chair. And again, like 2 people carrying that individual down. Of course, some of this depends on the weight of the individual. Do you even have 2 people in your home who could be able to help you with that? So some considerations there as well. There's an evacuation sling that can be used like a backpack. I would say probably only for a really small person if the caregiver or the person who's going to be carrying the person on their back is bigger than the other individual. And then there's this company that's called Adapts, and they have a portable transfer sling, and it's actually a sling similar to sort of the evacuation sling that we're looking at, that wraps around the person's body, but it also has head support. So if someone really struggles to keep their head up, this could be a better option. It is a little bit more expensive, but it's available if you just Google Adapts portable transfer sling. Their website comes right up. There's also some more high-tech or more expensive generally options. If you've ever stayed at a hotel where there's been an emergency, or a school, usually hotels and schools have these collapsible sort of chairs that essentially climb up or down stairs for emergency situations. Something like this, of course, is less expensive. Something a little bit more involved like this can be a couple $1,000s. So not always a feasible option for everyone. We've already talked a little bit about communication considerations, so I won't hammer on about this, but again, just considering if speech is a challenge that you experience, just really putting some thought into having some backup options, whether that's having something like an eye gaze board, partner assisted scanning, and the association, we're certainly happy to help you consider what those options could be for you. It's a little different for everybody. It's not a one size fits all sort of thing. Also considering what you would do, again, generators or considerations around alternative power sources if you use a speech generating device for your communication. Okay, so in terms of respiratory considerations, my first suggestion here is, in terms of preparing or thinking, is to talk to your vendor about what kind of alternative power considerations you may need to be aware of. If you use something like a BiPAP machine or a cough assist machine or a suction machine, and if those are machines that you're not familiar at all with, they are different machines that can help with breathing, but also help clear an airway, and can do multiple different things for folks. So you'll want to talk to the vendor and see, are there backup batteries that you can purchase to have on hand? Are there alternatives to using your device, or do you want to look into getting a backup device? typically insurance isn't going to cover a backup device. So these are just kind of things to think about. Also a good idea to test your backup machines if you do have them, and your backup batteries. Another thought, if you are a person who regularly breath stacks, which is sometimes done on a cough assist machine, something like a simple Ambu bag here can usually be purchased from the drugstore or sometimes given by your doctor's office to do manual breath stacking. So that's something to think about as well. And then considering a generator. Again, I will kind of keep saying this because it can make a big difference for you if you do use a lot of medical devices in your home. And here's my spiel about generators. And I will tell you, I'm definitely not an expert on generators, but generally speaking, you can look into a portable generator for a couple $100 to getting your whole entire home wired in with a stationary generator that can, make sure you can do everything in your home when the power goes out. So a lot of it's based on the resources that you have available and how reliant you are on using power in an emergency situation or a power outage. I did find for those who are PGE customers, they have a hotline that you can call and kind of staff with them about generators. So I thought that was kind of cool. So their phone number is listed there if you're interested in getting some advice or thoughts on it. I would say, most folks, who really want that full support will, get an electrical contractor to help them wire the stationary generator into the home. But, if you're thinking more of a portable generator and plugging appliances directly into the generator, it's always a good idea that you be really, really cautious about ever wiring something in. If you wanted to do that, I would highly suggest talking to your power company before taking any big steps, unless you are very savvy in this area. All right, and then lastly, I've just included some different resources that may be helpful for you as you're sort of navigating some of these discussions. Take 5 to Survive is just a great little website that includes some different activities that you might do. The Take 5 to Survive is basically take 5 minutes a day to do some planning and prep around this, and it makes some good suggestions. The medical information packet that I've referenced a couple times is available here. The Home Ventilator Users Emergency Prepared Checklist. I think this is a great tool for those who might be using non-invasive ventilation, so something like a CPAP or an AVAPS machine or a BiPAP. But it's also can be a really, really good checklist for those who might be opting for invasive ventilation. So somebody who might have a trach and is utilizing a ventilator. So that's kind of a whole other discussion that we can have another time, but there's a lot of considerations there. FEMA's got some really good information. Honestly, there's so much, it would take up, hours to try to go through everything. You may want to consider signing up for public alerts, so you can get alerts about different emergency considerations that are going on in your area, in your zip code. I believe when you sign up, you can get alerts on your phone, and you can decide where you want to get those alerts for certain areas that you want to get those alerts for. During the wildfires last year, I remember signing up for a couple different counties and I'd get some alerts. So you may also want to know how to turn them off when you don't want them, but never a good idea to get more information. And then FEMA also has a similar type of app where you can sign up for public alerts. And then lastly, I just included a video that was given, it was a presentation that was given a couple of years back through the National ALS Consortium group about emergency planning and ALS, and the link is there. So if that's something that you want to watch later on, you are more than welcome to do that. Right.